Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, and a staff writer, and now a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you are attending live, just a reminder that you're in listen-only mode. If you go down to your toolbar, you'll see that there's a Q&A box. You can start typing questions in right now. This is going to be a question and answer session with me. And if you are watching this as a recording, and I know that more and more of you are doing that, just remember that this was recorded on May 15th, 2024, and everything was true to the best of my knowledge as of that date, but you should always check because things change at NIH very quickly, especially this year. So there are a lot of changes coming down the pike. We are still learning about all the changes that are going to be ushered in with the next form set that will launch on January 25th. And I have sessions planned later in the year to discuss what some of those changes are, but they're not just to the changes in scoring criteria. They're going to have to do with changes to fellowship applications and bio sketches and training tables. And there are many, many changes coming down the pike. So we're going to do our best to educate ourselves about what those are and then to report back to you guys about that. So what you should be viewing in the library right now, those of you who are applying for Cycle 2 deadlines, I would imagine that you are, I hope, putting finishing touches on your application. So you may want to be looking at something like the checklist to avoid top mistakes. Or maybe watching the last chapter of Master the R series, which is about approach. So those might be helpful things for you to view. In terms of what's new in your membership, we are hoping, we've been waiting for weeks for CME approval on the Master the R series update, which we've had recorded and ready to go for weeks now. It's held up with the Massachusetts Medical Society for CME approval. They have begun looking at it today, so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to release that to you guys very soon. Those of you who have watched a fairly recent version of Master the R series, this one has a bunch of new samples in it. Examples that are from my clients' applications, their successful grant applications. So some of those examples I'll be presenting in Ask the Grant Writing Expert in upcoming months, talking about team tables and overview figures and rigor sections and things like that. Okay, so let's see. So again, feel free to start typing your question and answers in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start talking about some of the questions. Oh, we have some. So let me pause here. Let's see. Hello, I'm applying for a K-22 and I have questions regarding the candidate background. Since this is not a mentored grant, how much does advisory team matter? Can I propose to learn more about leadership and mentoring instead of scientific techniques? Does everyone on the advisory team need to provide a recommendation letter? I don't remember that last one is a simple yes or no, and I honestly don't remember the answer to that. But if you go into there's actually a table if you go into Master the K series course, and I'm trying to remember if you have access to it. I'm not sure which organization you're at. But in my Master the K series course, there's actually a table saying which mechanisms require letters and which do not. And I don't remember if the K-22 requires a letter from everyone on the advisory team. My guess is it doesn't. But for your other question, so for those who don't know, a K-22, it's not a traditional mentored K application of like the K-01, K-08, K-23. It's a little bit different than those. I'm actually working on one of those this week. So one of the things you asked is how much does the advisory team matter? I mean, you're not going to emphasize them in the same way you would as you would on like a KO1 or a KO8 or a K23 for sure. Because this is really meant not to be a mentored award. So you're really going to speak more to um, your launch to independence. And your other question was to learn more about leadership and mentoring instead of scientific techniques. I think that you don't have to say that you're mentoring in scientific techniques, but I do think you have to say something a little bit more than leadership. I don't think a K-22 that focuses primarily on leadership and mentoring, but I assume you mean learning how to be a mentor at that point. So you learning how to be a leader and a mentor. I don't think you can write a whole K-22 where that's the backbone of what you're learning in order to launch your independent research career. This is my opinion, so you may want to talk to, um, you know, your own personal mentors and the program officer. In my opinion, I think you're going to need a little more meat on the bones of that. And it doesn't have to be scientific techniques. It could be that you need to learn, get more content expertise in a specific area. It could be taking a short course in something or attending conferences in something. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're like going into somebody's lab and learning a technique. But I don't think that there's quite enough meat on the bones to just say leadership and mentoring. But again, that's my opinion. So I would ask people within your field, and in particular, I don't know what organization you're at, but you may want to go to your pre-award support office and ask if they have a recently successful K-22, and then ask the PI on that K-22 if you could look at the application and see what they said in terms of their K-22, because it is a little different to write the K-22 and the K-99 R00 are a little different than the other types of mentored Ks. So I hope that's helpful. I know I equivocated a bit there, but hopefully that's helpful. And it looks like you're applying to NCI. Okay. Okay, here is a another question. I have this broad aim, compare cervical cancer screening rates, which is an outcome among women 25 to 65 years who receive HPV self-sampling, which is the intervention, versus educational control and standard pap smear. Both groups would also be given mobile phone for results return and follow-up reminder messages. Please help me rephrase the main aim, including 3 aims for the study using PICO as I write this proposal. I intend having an intervention and a control group. Both groups would receive education about self-screening and pap smear. Self-sampling kits would be given to the intervention group only. So I don't typically help people write aims. What you really need to do is, in part because I don't design projects. And I don't write applications. I advise and I edit, but you have to write your you have to design your project. Like you can't ask a consultant to design a project for you. So probably your best bet is to speak to a subject matter expert within your organization. And what you may want to think about is work backward from what is your project hypothesis? What are you hoping to test in this project? And then try to break down the project. I don't even know if this is an R01. Or the NOFO, like I would need way more, I would have to sit down with you for a couple of hours to do this. So you really should talk to a subject matter expert in a program and then run it by a program officer. But one of the things that you want to think about is what the hypothesis, the project hypothesis is. What is it that you're trying to test? and then work backward from there and then try to break it down into three discrete areas. Are you looking at like acceptability and feasibility? I don't know the sample size here, so I can't say what that is either. I would need way more information about this. And the other thing is, I don't know what the cost is of delivering this. So the project has to fit the scope in terms of the money allowed and the time period. And I don't even know what kind of mechanism this is, if it's like an R34 or an R01. But this is something you really want to sit down with somebody who's a subject matter expert and have them help you draft your specific aims. And then you would take them to a chalk talk and, have people within your department vet the aims and then have the program officer vet your aims. I do know what organization you're at, and you have access to Master the R series. So what I would strongly encourage you to do is to watch Chapter 1 preparation and Chapter 2 specific aims and walk your way through those steps, so that it talks about how to vet a project idea and how to take your draft some aims and take them to mentors and a chalk talk, and um, how to identify program officers and that kind of thing. Okay, let's see. I'm submitting an R21 mechanism for secondary data analysis. Do you think the future direction of the R21 should be an R1 grant? That's a really good question, because secondary data analysis is the one instance where a short format R, typically an R03 actually, is for secondary data analysis. So I would encourage you to look at the R03 rather than the R21. But it's the one time that there isn't always a follow-up R01. It's a great question, because people usually are conditioned to think of the short format Rs like the R03 and the R21 as a pathway to the R01. So I think everybody just kind of thinks of it as always being the case. And this is the one instance where it's not necessarily the case. So a secondary data analysis could easily be a standalone project, but it's typically an R03 and not an R21. So I would encourage you to look at that. And then the next part of the question, if so, do you have any suggestions for proposing future directions based on the R21 findings using secondary data sets? As I said, it doesn't have to, you don't have to have a follow-up. This mechanism is specifically for the R21. Okay. You don't necessarily have to have a follow-up R01 with a secondary data analysis, but if you wanted to, and you didn't want to, in that R01, you did not want to yourself collect new data, I would imagine that one easy way to expand the project beyond that is to look at other data sets, other existing data sets, so that you could expand sample sizes and potentially have a large enough sample size to power sub-studies to look at things like race, ethnicity, gender, things like, or sex, things like that. So that's one way that you could pitch it. I would also read the R21 really carefully, the NOFO for the R21, and see if there's any language in there about having to pitch. And I don't know if this is like a topic specific R21 that's specifically for secondary data analysis, but you could read it and see if there's any language about encouraging a follow-up R01. But yeah, it's a great question, because it's the one time a small format R doesn't necessarily have to have a follow-up R01. But if you wanted to, just look at other data, other existing data sets, and expand your sample sizes and power sub-studies. That's one way to handle that. Okay, with a KO1, how important is, so KO1, again, we're looking at the Career Development Award, CDAs, the mentored K. With a KO1, how important is it to plan the budget to reach nearly the maximum allowable research expense amount each year? So I don't do budgets. If anybody has a recommendation on this, please feel free to write in. There's more to this. Question, my mentor suggested that I should add a graduate student assistant to the application in order to fill the budget, since my other research costs are approximately only half of the allowable $50,000 per year. Do you have any impression about how reviewers of the KO1 consider the budget amounts? I don't, because I don't do budgets at all. But what I will say is that I know from talking to some of my clients, and I think this is probably true on the K, but many grantees have their budgets cut. So if your mentor has experience mentoring at the K level and they think that's the right, let me rephrase that. If your mentor has recent experience, like in the last 3 years, they have helped a K applicant land a K at NIH, and they feel that this is the right approach, particularly at your institute. I would take that to the bank. I think that mentor's advice is probably correct, and I would do that, especially because I know that in general, grantees often have their budgets cut. I don't know if it's necessarily true on Ks, but I certainly know that that's true at the R level. So if you have confidence in your mentor, if your mentor has helped a K applicant land a K grant in the last 3 or so years at your institute, and they think that's what you should do, then I would do that. This is also a question that you could ask a program officer. I think it would be okay to ask a program officer that question. Okay, let's see. Oh, we have another KO1 question, and I had one during the week, so we'll stick with the KO1 theme. I have a KO1 with two separate aims on the same topic, and aim one is analyses of secondary data, but aim two is a pilot trial of an adapted intervention. Would I fill out two separate forms? Oh, this is about the clinical trials form. So yes. So because these are two completely different data sets. So the adapted intervention. So the secondary data analysis, I'd probably have to know a little bit more about that, but it's going to be like two separate things. It's two separate data sets. So your human subject, you're going to fill out two separate records for the human subjects form. So the secondary data analysis, it's whether or not that's even considered a human subjects project, it's clearly not a clinical trial because you're not collecting the data and there's no intervention. So it's either a non-human subjects project or a human subject project, and it's going to hinge on whether or not anybody on your team can re-identify anonymized data. I'm assuming that this is anonymized data. But if the data are anonymized and you can, and somebody on your team can re-identify the data sets to a specific person, then it's considered human subjects. And there is that flow chart. I've shown that many, many, many times, but I'm going to drop the URL in the chat first. Let me just pull it up. NIH, is it human? This is probably the flow chart I use most at NIH. I use this all the time. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see it first. So this is you can see by how quickly I pulled this thing up that I use it all the time. So for that first part, for the aim one, the secondary data analysis, are they living? You're going to go through all of this stuff, whether or not you can re-identify. So it may not even be a human subjects project, in which case you don't have to fill out the form, you just answer question one. But if you answer yes to any of these other questions, then it would be considered human subjects non-clinical trial. And I'm going to put that in the chat. Hold on a second. I'm just going to drop that URL in the chat right now, although you guys are probably sick to death of seeing me use that flowchart because I pull it up all the time. And then the second part of your question was aim two is a pilot trial of an adapted intervention. So if that is an NIH-defined clinical trial, you're going to answer up to and including Section 5 of the PHS Human Subjects and Clinical Trial Information Form. So these are two completely separate records because it's different data sets. So that's how you'll do that. I don't know what organization you're at, but I have a course on how to fill out the human subjects form. If you don't have access to that, in my opinion, the best instructions for the human subjects form are in SF 424. They're super detailed. There are also websites at NIH that are meant to clarify any gray areas where it's hard to tell how you should answer a certain question. But in my opinion, there are websites and videos and everything about how to fill out the form. Just go to SF 424. I think the instructions there are so much better than in other places. Um, okay. So, and I think that is everything for that. Yeah. So that's everything for that question. So I had several questions during the week. One is really quick and easy to answer, so I'll start with that one because it's so easy. Um, I had a person ask, what is the difference between early stage investigator status and new investigator status? And I don't think I answered this on the last call, but these are both types of funding advantages at NIH. So the early stage investigator status is a bigger funding advantage. It is for people who have never been a PI on an R01 or equivalent and are 10 years or less from their terminal degree or their last, like if you're a clinician and you did a clinical fellowship, the clock would start at the end of the clinical fellowship. And it's a big funding advantage. A lot of institutes won't report what the funding advantage is, but it's not uncommon for it to be 5 percentage points. Sometimes it's a little less, but I've seen it go as high as 10%. That's a big difference. So, but 5 is pretty typical. So if they're funding their R01s up to I don't know, 8%, then it would be up to 13% for the ESIs. Um, and the thing is, this only pertains to R01. So, and it's only if you're a PI. So if you were a PI on like an R21, that doesn't eliminate your ESI status. If you were a co-investigator or an R01, you still have ESI status. Those things won't eliminate it. And all of the PIs have to have this ESI status in order to receive that funding advantage. New investigator status is you haven't been a PI on an R01 or equivalent, but you're past that 10-year clock. So maybe you're 11 or 12 years out from your terminal degree. Still confers a small funding advantage, and you should be able to see in ERA Commons that your status is a new investigator. It might be like a couple of percentage points. It's not quite as juicy as the ESI status, but it does give you a small funding advantage. Okay, and with the last 5 minutes, again, feel free to type your questions in. Let me just make sure nobody has typed anything in while I was chatting. But yeah, go ahead and type any more questions in. And otherwise, would you help to edit a candidate section in a K proposal? I don't know where you are and if your organization has a contract for that. So if you type in which organization you're at, I'm the only one who can see it. And I'll let you know if your organization, I don't have a one-on-one contract there. But you do have access to Master the Case series at your organization, and it is really comprehensive. So I would encourage you to watch that. So it's an 8-part writing course that's in the virtual library. And the candidate section is chapter 6. So it walks you through step by step how to write the candidate section and will give you samples of, from successful applications of, how to structure different things. Oh, good. Okay, this person is saying I watched it. It was very helpful. Thanks. So apologies that there isn't a one-on-one contract there. We're not taking new contracts right now because I am at absolute saturation on the one-on-one work. So since we're on this K theme, I'm just going to finish in the last couple of minutes, unless other people have questions, with a K question that popped up, and I'll ask it in its most general form so that people can weigh in if they want to. But I've gotten this question several dozen times over the last years in one guise or another, but it has to do with the Ks, with the mentored Ks, the Career Development Awards, and particularly the ones that are meant for junior faculty. So like the K01, the K08, the K23, like those guys. And the question is, if you are, how do you write it as if let's say you're writing it and you're hoping to do your project with a mentoring team at the place where you currently are, say as a postdoc. So you might be at University X as a postdoc, and they're hoping to hire you, and you're hoping that they'll hire you, but it's not definite yet, and the funding isn't lined up yet, and they're not sure yet, and you're also looking for faculty positions elsewhere, and you're hoping to land your K. How do you write that up if your whole mentoring plan and your project are contingent on your staying at this organization, but you know that you might be leaving for a faculty position elsewhere, particularly if you land the K, because that makes your faculty search so much easier. So this is a problem that has come up many, many, many times in one form or another. And so I'll give you a little history of how I have seen organizations handle this. So in general, I don't think it's a good idea for a K applicant, and again, this is my opinion, I don't think it's a good idea for a K applicant to write an application saying, here's my mentoring plan, here's my advisory committee, and here's my project. But I'm going to be really squishy about how I describe this because I don't know if I'm staying at University X. I might be going somewhere else if I land a faculty position somewhere else. That kind of squishy language, in my experience, reviewers are allergic to anything that's to be determined in general in grant applications, unless they specifically say it. Like sometimes you might have a project where you say, I don't know who's going to be on this advisory committee. I can just tell you the types of expertise, and the NOFO says that that's kosher. In general, to be determined is not good on grant applications. Reviewers want hard and fast information. So because of that, a lot of K applicants write up their applications as if they're going to get an offer for a faculty position at University X, and that this is going to be a done deal. And the institutional letter will sometimes say that as well. They'll say, we're hoping to hire this person. Our support of this project is not contingent on them landing the K, et cetera, et cetera. Because that seems to work best with reviewers. However, I know of one academic medical center where they played this kind of gamble because they knew it would play better with reviewers, even though it wasn't definite that the person was going to get this faculty position. And what happened was the person did not land their K, and then the academic medical center did not make an offer to hire them. And then the K applicant sued the academic medical center saying, in your institutional letter on my K, you said you were going to hire me, and now you're not hiring me. So now that particular academic medical center has stopped playing that gamble, stopped playing that game, because they realized this is just too big a gamble for us. But it does create a problem because now that a lot of places have stopped saying that in their institutional letter, reviewers are saying, well, you're acting like you're going to carry out this whole project at University X, but University X has said that they aren't definitely hiring you. So how do we know that that's going to happen? So this is the conundrum that K applicants sometimes face. And the reality is that once you land your K, it does become a lot easier to get a faculty position. And in fact, NIH has a mechanism for K applicants moving to a different university because they got a faculty position elsewhere. So, and what you typically do is keep your advisory committee but your primary mentor then shifts into a non-primary mentor, and they become part of your advisory committee, and you look for a primary mentor on site at the new University Y, this new place, and then try to keep your project and try to keep your training goals somewhat similar, but identify a primary mentor who is at the new place. So I don't know if people have any advice on this, but that's kind of the history of what I have seen happen over however many years of doing this. I think I've been doing this 17 years now. I used to see all the time universities making this gamble of saying that they were going to hire the person, even though it wasn't a done deal. And then, there were instances of them being sued. Now they don't do it. And the reviewers call out the applicants saying, well, like your university isn't promising to hire you. And so we don't have a vote of confidence. It's tricky. If anybody has any thoughts on that, feel free to email me. I'd love to hear more about that. Okay, so I know we're a little over. I'm just going to look quickly. Can you mention difference between co-mentor and advisor on a KO1? So the mentors and the co-mentors play a much more substantial role than the advisors do. They should be meeting with you pretty regularly. Mentors should be meeting with you weekly, co-mentors maybe every other week. Advisors, you may only see them for a discrete portion of the project or like a 6-month period in year 2. They play they're relegated to a smaller role on the project. Will the advisory member not on site be criticized? No, having an advisory member on a K off site is fine. I've even seen them on the other side of the planet. I had an applicant who was working with somebody who literally could not have been further away if they tried. But because they're an advisor and not like a primary mentor or a co-mentor, it was okay, and they worked via Zoom, and that was acceptable. So like certainly having advisors at your old university will be acceptable. It's the primary mentor who really has to be on site. Meg, you share such great stories and wisdom. You're very welcome. I'm always happy to share this stuff. Our institutional letter says something about the faculty position being contingent on funding, but not this particular funding. Oh, that's clever. Okay, that's really good. I like that. So because you can't say that the faculty position is contingent on landing the K. That is an absolute no-no. But this is like a really interesting end run around it to say it's contingent on funding, but not necessarily the K funding. But some organizations, they don't even want to promise that. So it gets a little dicey. But anyway, I like that one. I'm going to tuck that one in my back pocket for the next time I have an applicant in this situation. Okay, so we are over time. I love it when you guys ask questions. I can just talk about this stuff all day. I'm endlessly fascinated by all the nuances of NIH grant writing. So load me up on questions. I think we have one more session of Q&A with me before we start going back to mini tutorials. So let's see. It looks like, yeah, you have one more session of Q&A with me on May 29th. And then I'm going to start doing mini tutorials. So June 12th is going to be rigor on an R01 application, and I'll be presenting some new samples from the last batch of applications I had that I really liked that are going to be in the new Master the R training. So as always, really appreciate your support, everybody, and love the questions. You guys ask great questions. So thank you so much, and good luck with your grant writing, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.